Hélio Mattar, the president of Akatu Institute for Conscious Consumption. We educate consumers towards a different reality in consumption, the reality of the need for sustainability. The mission of the Institute is to mobilize individuals to use the transforming power of their acts of conscious consumption as an instrument to build sustainability of life in Earth. And we define conscious consumption as being consumption which is conscious of its impacts on society and the environment and seeks to maximize positive impacts and minimize the negative ones, so to preserve life in the planet. Consumption has everything to do with sustainability, and actually when we look at the evolution of humanity, we're now 7 billion people, as you all know, but the speed at which that happened, we went from 3 billion people to 7 billion people in 50 years. And consumption went from $5 trillion to $30 trillion in that same period. So we multiplied population by a little bit more than 2 and multiply consumption by 6, so consumption per person multiplied by 3. By the demand for natural resources, of course, increases proportionally, a little bit less than proportionally, with consumption. So nowadays, total consumption of humanity demands 50% more renewable natural resources than the planet is able to regenerate, be it in terms of clean water, potable water, clean air, arable land, and the absorption of the residues of consumption. And that is happening when only 16% of the humanity is responsible for 78% of total consumption. So you see that consumption is extremely concentrated. And the evolution of the use of the renewable natural resources was very rapid. It went from using half the planet in 1960 to use 100% of the planet in 1987 and getting to 50% more than what the planet is able to regenerate in 2010. If the whole of humanity, not the 16%, but the whole of humanity would consume in the way the richest inhabitants on Earth do, it would be necessary to have almost 5 planets to supply all that consumption. Of course, we don't have that, and the question is, technology change by itself will bring sustainability to natural resources? It certainly helps, but it is totally insufficient. It's very clear when you look at the supply of the whole humanity with only one planet, it would be necessary to use 5 times less natural resources than today's use to produce a unit of product or services, which means to say a 75 to 80% increase in productivity in natural resources. Of course, that can be attained, but in a longer period of time than the one which is available to humanity. So the sustainability equation necessarily involves technology change, yes, but also public policies in terms of looking at price of products and pricing differently sustainable and non-sustainable products, and conscious consumption, which means to say the need to change consumption behavior. But how to do that? What is necessary to change consumers' behavior? To threaten with the sustainability problem? Well, Al Gore already showed us that he was able to tell humanity about the problem of global warming, but not to mobilize people to change their behaviors in the direction of more sustainable behavior. Is it too big a problem for individual consumers to tackle? Well, the truth is that consumers need good reasons to leave their comfort zones. It's necessary for consumers to perceive 2 things. The first one, that individual consumption over a long period of time has enormous impact. That's what I call the mathematics of individual consumption. That may be for one individual or for a small group of individuals over a long period of time. In general, people will say, I'm too small, I'll have no impact. Yes, we will have an impact given the amount of consumption that we have nowadays and the life expectancy that we have nowadays. The second point is the model of consumption of the social reference group practically defines consumption behavior. So it's important that the social recognition is given to the new social behavior in consumption. So let's look at the first one, the individual impact of consumption. When we look at natural resources for the total consumption of humanity, we have 112, the volume of 112 Empire State Buildings every day being consumed in terms of natural resources. If we take the 78% of the resources which are consumed by the 16% of humanity and take just one person, yearly that one person will consume 32 cubic meters of natural resources. If we put that 32 cubic meters per year in cans of 1 meter in diameter and 1.8 meter in height, which is about 3 feet by 6 feet, in about 10 years, 8 months and 14 days, one person will have a pile of cans the same size of the Empire State Building. And for the whole life of a person, 75 years, 7 piles of cans, the height of the Empire State Building, would be necessary to hold all the natural resources that are used by just one person. When we look at waste, looking at Americans or Britain, 1.3 kilos a day of waste. In 75 years, about the expectancy of life, 36 tons of waste. And if we take 5 families with 3 kids each, which means to say 25 people over their lifetime, 75 years, the Big Bang will not be sufficient to hold all the volume of waste that will be produced just by those 5 families. And a final example with water. Americans, if one American would reduce his or her water consumption by 50%, still they would consume 150% above the recommended by the United Nations. But if they reduce by half, each American would save in 75 years 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools in terms of water. And if we take 22 Americans during their lifetime, the amount that will be saved is 1 minute of what falls in water in the Iguazu Falls, which is 1.5 times the Niagara Falls. Look at the Iguazu Falls. This is the Iguazu Falls for just 15 seconds. Now imagine that for 1 minute. That's only 22 Americans reducing water consumption by half. But what do companies have to do with that? Are there good reasons for companies to worry about sustainability? Well, corporations, as you know, are operating in a very interconnected world in which real-time information is coming from increasingly diverse sources. At the same time, digital networks are linking everybody to everybody. That leads everyone to be an opinion leader, everyone to be a change maker. And any action of a corporation is visible in real time to everybody. Transparency and visibility in our 21st century for corporations are a fact, not any longer a value as it used to be. But what do companies have to worry about? Well, the 21st century consumer is totally different than the mid of the last century consumer. There were 3 paradigm shifts. The first one, natural resources which are not infinite. Everybody thought they were infinite. Instability and constant change in the workplace, not any longer labor for the whole life, and no protection from the welfare state. So there are uncertainty in these 3 changes in paradigms. Uncertainty about the habitat, personal insecurity, uncertainty about the state's role as a social net. So insecurity and uncertainty is the characteristic of life of citizens in the beginning of the 21st century. As a consequence of that, today's consumer understand that what happens to others may happen to me. Since everybody is in a situation of insecurity and uncertainty. That leads to a clear perception about interdependence and solidarity and demands that society and the environment be protected. But by whom? By large corporations that are bigger than national states. More power, more responsibility. Consumers expect companies to be positive agents for social environmental good and not only agents of production. Research in 28 countries show that 60% of the consumers expect that. But who will tell how good companies are in their social and environmental action? Any action of a corporation is visible in real time to all stakeholders, as I said. So stakeholders tend to be the most important vehicles of communication in establishing the reputation of companies. Actually, the reputation of a company will depend more and more on what stakeholders will say about the company and less on what the company will say about itself. So the reputation on social and environmental care, which will be so important in this century, is defined in the day-to-day actions of a company becoming visible. And these actions are made tangible by the employee's behavior. So employees are the main multipliers of the reputation of a company. So to educate employees for conscious consumption as a daily instrument for sustainability will make the company to act more and more in a sustainable way. And the employees will have a tremendous multiplier effect to suppliers, employees, family, and other stakeholders, so that the sustainability impact of a company will be proportional to the sustainability consciousness of the employees. We at Akatu, we work with Walmart in all their stores, 450 stores all over Brazil. We did capacity building for 3,200 multipliers. They work with 80,000 consumers, to 80,000 employees, and that changed the culture of Walmart in Brazil towards sustainability. Workshops with employees in which they experienced, they were not taught about, the problem of sustainability, to identify the transforming power of individual acts of consumption, and to build a reference group that values sustainability and conscious consumption. So in that way, companies may become not only a part of the problem, but also a part of the solution. The major challenge, educate consumers towards sustainability and to actively lead stakeholders to become allies and not a threat to the reputation of companies. And also a radical and active transparency for companies to gain credibility and differentiate from opportunists. At last, in the 21st century corporation, given that scenario and the idea of working with employees towards sustainability, corporations will be different from 19th and 20th century, in which Thomas Friedman used to say, companies exist to make profit. In the 21st century, companies make profits in order to exist, but they exist for a higher purpose, to actively contribute to a better society, as said by Ray Anderson, and the purpose of business should be redefined as shared value creation and not just profit, as said by Michael Porter. Welcome to a society of conscious consumers. Thank you very much.